Hey guys, Peter here again, Frontier of Faith. Just want to talk to you about weakness, how we all have them, and how we should all own our weaknesses. Paul's Paul talks in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 8 to 10. I'll just read the scripture out for you. Concerning this thing, I pleaded with the Lord 3 times that it might depart from me. And he said to me, My grace is sufficient for you, for my strength is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, most gladly, I will rather boast in my infirmities, that the power of Christ might rest upon me. Therefore, I take pleasure in infirmities, in reproaches, and needs, and persecutions, and in distresses for Christ's sake. For when I am weak, I am strong. So, Paul talks about weakness, and we all have them. Personal weaknesses, weaknesses of the flesh, weaknesses in our body, even in our soul. Paul, people have debated this, but there's no doubt, certainly in my mind, that Paul had some sort of physical weakness that he had to contend with, that, well, evidently the Lord hadn't healed. So the Lord was using him mightily, in so many things, healings, and all signs and wonders as an apostle, but evidently he was struggling with a personal physical ailment of some kind. I don't want to debate what that is, but he was struggling with something physical besides his persecutions and everything that he was going through. Now, why is this? Now, I was brought up in Christianity as Pentecostal, right? And, I've heard messages preach how God always heals all the time. And if there's anything, if there's a reason that you didn't get healed, it's not God's fault. It's just, a lack of faith, or, the problem is with us, basically. And it's a very black and white sort of way of looking at things. Something I kind of held to, I guess, for a season. But I think over the long-term reality, if you've been walking with God for a while, you might have experienced healings, miraculous healings from God. But if believers were honest, I'm talking about people who've been around for a while, they'll have to admit that there's certain things that they might be struggling with physically or emotionally, or whatever, which just seems to be a recurring issue in their life that just they haven't seemed to be able to put behind them. So I'm not necessarily talking about sin here. I'm just talking about weaknesses, because I do believe that God expects us to deal with sins in our life. But I guess I can only talk about from my perspective and my experience, and sort of try and compare that to what we read in the scriptures. For me, I won't bore you with too much of the details, but many years ago, the Lord spoke to me and he said, if you can control a diet, you can control the flesh. That set me on a journey of discovering how food was impacting my overall sense of well-being, and also especially my mood. My moods would change. I wasn't diagnosed with anything, but it was just something that I seemed to struggle with from time to time. And the Lord sort of revealed it to me that the cause was food, right? And it got me on a journey of discovering additives and types of food and everything and all that sort of stuff. And I'm still on that journey today. And I believe it's probably going to be a journey, unless the Lord changes his mind or whatever, he can. But it's probably going to be a journey that I'm going to be on until the day, I go home to God, unless he does something. It decides to do something different. But I've certainly reached a point, and I think sometimes it's wise to just accept the fact that you have a weakness, because God actually may have ordained this weakness in our life for our own benefit. And for the benefit of the world around us. I've certainly found that in my life that when I feel really good and things are kind of working out for me and falling into place, you know what? Hey, maybe it's just me, but you start to just get a little bit, your judgment gets a bit too, you get a bit overconfident, you get, let's say it, a little bit proud. It starts to creep in. But, Paul talks about this issue here about being, lest he become exalted above measure, that this messenger of Satan or whatever, is probably a demon here involved. But the whole point here, without getting too much in the weeds, is that these weaknesses and persecutions and that really were really there, kept in place for Paul to keep his feet on the ground and to stay humble, right? So that the Lord could actually use him effectively in the ministry that he had for his life. So Paul talks about embracing, when he came to realize this and accept it, Paul talks about embracing that weakness, right? It's a hard thing to sort of accept, especially when there's kind of pain and frustration and distress involved. But I believe we sort of have to reach that point when we're in weakness, when we have a weakness in our life, that we just have to own it, embrace it. Don't make excuses for it. Don't try and cover it up. But just be honest. Be honest about our weaknesses. So, for me personally, my weakness was the way how this stuff would affect my mood. And I'm, if I could feel my mood drop, pretty much it was because of something that I've eaten, or, also my body does not detoxify chemicals very well. So that has a knock-on effect of affecting my mood as well. So I have to be very vigilant with all this sort of stuff. And it's a constant battle, so I'm constantly, and the problem that I have is that I love food. I've met people who can just look at food and walk straight past it, and it's not an issue for them if they're not hungry. Whereas, for me, food is, hey, it's always been a temptation. And, on my father's side of the family, many of them are overweight. I've never had really too much issues with being overweight, but still I have those cravings for nice things to eat, right? So it's not something, I've got those cravings that I've got to deal with, but I've got to control them because I know it has an impact on my health. So, but I believe that the Lord has used this in a sense for good in my life, that it's brought me to my knees, it's kept me humble, it's kept me focused on the Lord, it's kept my priorities right, all right? So, I just think that's the case. I think Paul starts talking about glorying in his weaknesses, because in the previous chapters, he was talking about, basically defending his credibility as an apostle to the Corinthians. And previously, in the previous chapter or so, he was talking about false apostles. The inference here is that these false apostles, are people who just appear overconfident. They're good speakers. They have this air of authority about them, or at least they like to transmit that. But Paul evidently was not a good speaker. Right? The power of God was working through him, but he was not this person. He was probably more of an unassuming person, probably someone you wouldn't expect the Lord to use. He was obviously very, very smart because he was a rabbi in training, but his speaking ability, all that sort of stuff, which apparently the Greek culture at that time really looked highly upon speaking ability. They would have the, what do you call it? The Greeks really respected that sort of stuff without going into too much detail. And so that's why he was struggling with the Corinthians, because they were mostly Greek. Had a Greek influence there in the plus Roman influence, of course. So yeah, that's basically it. I don't want to go on too much about this, but I just want to really encourage people to embrace your weaknesses and accept the fact that in your weakness, that God is still working through you. He's still touching people's lives through you here, and he still uses, and he's not looking down on you because of your weaknesses. He's not disappointed on you for not overcoming your weaknesses. In fact, some of your weaknesses are actually ordained by God. I mean, we see here, my grace is sufficient for you. You know, Jesus knew about his weakness and refused to deal with it. He said, no, my grace is enough. My power is made perfect in weakness. So that goes against a lot of doctrine that we've been taught in the charismatic church. It goes right against it. And I grew up in the charismatic church, but I think after 25, 26 years of following the Lord and seeking him with all of my heart, there's certain realities that you have to face. You know, there are many instances where people of God, men of God, were struggling with physical infirmities. Timothy, various other names that Paul mentions in the Bible that they were struggling with. So I think it's something that we're probably going to have to deal with until the day the Lord takes us and we get our glorified bodies. Yeah. Hope this helps somebody. God bless you. Take care. Love you. Bye-bye.